Get a 5-minute business book review, pivotal moments with failed businesses, and hear an interview with a business disruptor who will share their $10,000 mistake. This is the Forward Motion Business Show with Professor Ken and Professor Paul A Marino. Hit new heights. Start with Forward Motion.
So what, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you're great with big data. I know you do a lot of analytical stuff. Every time I go see Shellie, I leave with a book. She always hands me a book, so I get homework to do. But, what's some of the key takeaways? How do you deal with this? What's the secret? What do you, what have you synthesized from this process?
Well, I think, from this process, what I realized, we've ended up serving about 2,500 kids, which, anytime you get anytime you get over like 100, 150, you're going to get a distribution of types of problems and challenges and successes with kids, And so, from a data point of view, what I try to do is look at, okay, who are the kids who have the hardest time? Well, who are the kids on the tail of a statistical curve? So when you're thinking about data, what you're trying to do is look at that data over time. And then see who these kids are who are the most challenged. That's one thing with the data. As you're collecting all this information about these kids and watching them and seeing they grow. The other thing is the watching them and seeing as they grow, right? And what I've learned is that you can track data, just asking the kids how they feel a certain day. And what you can see is much like an economics curve, right? You can see that data either trend up or trend down. But they'll have good days and bad days. So you have to have trend lines to figure out how they're moving along.
Well, that's always impressed me about your organization and about you. You speak to a lot of organizations, and I don't know a lot of organizations. I'm sure there's a million good ones out there, but you take a very statistical approach. You take a very data approach. And I remember reading your thesis where you talked about going into a zip code and actually trying to raise the level of that zip code. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in working with the kids and working on gun violence and working across the criminal justice and the social service system, what I've come to realize is that, there's a lot of crossover, and it really is a matter of figuring out where is that crossover. And we can do that with geographic data, and we can analyze that data using techniques actually out of the physical sciences. So if you think about, you go mine for oil and gas, right? If you're going to punch a hole in the ocean, you're going to precisely know where to punch that hole. Well, those same methodologies can be applied to solving social problems. We can collect data if you treat community surveys or even crime data, like data that you get on soil. You can actually use mapping and identify precisely where you need to be, down to the street, the block level. And what we found over time is in working in these working precisely at the block or precisely with the right families, you can affect the entire neighborhood and dissipate the problems that they're solving. And I really think that this is the direction that we've learned from business. Business is very focused on using data. The big data thing, I think the thing that got me started was whenever Walmart, they realized after hurricanes, we liked blueberry Pop-Tarts because they mined their data, right? And so they put them in the aisles, and that's a precise thing. Well, the same types of activities we can do with data to learn about social problems, and we should.
So those trends that you're talking about, because, in my marketing life, we always look at trends, but I don't look at trends on a weekly basis, because in the business world, the trend for a week doesn't really tell me anything. So we have to look at blocks of 4 weeks, or blocks of 3 months, quarters, or even an annual trend. So historically, let's say, I'll give you an example. So we all know what happened in 2020. 2019 obviously was different than 2020 from a business point of view. You mentioned products selling at a Walmart, let's say. So in 2019, product will sell X amount of volume because 2019 was a normal year. 2020, of course, was a COVID year. So now you look at historicals, here we are in 2021. You cannot really depend and rely on 2020 and 2021 to give you 2022 data because it's so skewed. You might have to go back to 2019 data, right? Now, this is the reason why I brought that up today, and I can't cite to you the report, but I was listening to the radio, And they brought out an interesting study. We're finding now that the teenagers, because of COVID, are going to be much more mentally, mental health challenged because of COVID. That's a new report, a new study that came out. I mean, it was pretty obvious to me. I mean, I had a couple teenagers going home. If you have a house and there's a teenager in the house during COVID, you could obviously see that they're going out of their mind, right? But I thought it was interesting because we don't know what's going to happen yet. So I think all the norms that we had in 19, and now we had 20 and 21 going into 22. How do you know, well, this is going to happen? Because we have the last 3 years, I've been one or the other or in the middle. So it's really hard to predict, right?
It is. And I think, one of the things that I've realized crossing all of these genres, or I'd say, is that, working with children of inmates and families, a lot of who have chronic generational poverty, you're really playing the long game. I mean, the real long game, not, we've had kids in our program for 15 years. They now have their own children, right? And so when we're looking at those trends, what I'm doing is realizing that maybe we weren't able to really affect the kids that were in the program in our view, right? Maybe their trend line didn't shift so much. But what I'm seeing is what they do with their children. So they will take their children, and like I have a kid, she's a mess. I mean, I'm not just going to say she's a mess, right? She's always been a mess. Her mom, she was 2 when her mom was incarcerated. Her father was also incarcerated.
Wow.
She used to tell me, I don't know why you mess with me. It's in my DNA, right? But this child had a child at 18. Number one, her mom was 15 when she had her.
Mm-hmm.
So she waited. She was 18 when she had a child. So I consider that a good thing, right?
That's better.
The second thing is that baby, regardless of what's going on in her world, she makes sure she gets that baby to an early start program. She's very dedicated. So that's the kind of shifts I'm talking about over time. Now, 2018, 2019, we're okay years. 2020, 21 is going to affect these kids, and you're going to have this blip in your data. But one of the things that when it happened was we immediately pivoted to start working with these kids on a weekly basis and really reach out to them and try to, because they haven't been able to see their parents in 2 years. Right. Because I mean, it's hard.
You can't go in, right?
They've started letting visitation occur, but for a long time there was no visitation, and we haven't been able to do our bonding visits because it's we're going to start redoing it, but it's been hard. So the question is then, how do you keep them on that track even with that blip? How do you still keep that trend line going up?
Right.
And what we've done is a lot of crazy stuff. We're doing skateboarding. And, these kids need a way of out and to breathe, lots of different hobbies. And I think that's where you go back to your own childhood and go, okay, what did my parents do?
Yeah.
Right.
True. Yeah. Listen, I grew up in New York, and we were never in the house. We were always in the street. We were just talking about, there's a game in New York called Shellie. It's a game that you play with bottle caps, and you draw a board in the street, literally in the street. You draw a board and you shoot bottles. It's almost like marbles. You shoot bottle caps, and every once in a while someone will say car, you get out of the street and the car will drive by and you go back to playing the game. That's just one thing. Kick the can. All these things outdoors, I think is so much better than what we have today, electronics and all that stuff. And we had a guest last week. We were talking about that, the effects of the electronics. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a 12-year-old right now, because I mean, you got so many things that seem like being pointed dead at you. Challenging, right? To be a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, all the pressures that you have must be crazy.
Well, I think it is, but I also think that the kids, as the book range said, the kids are getting smarter, right? And they're moving faster.
True.
Every generation, even though we don't see it, but every generation's moving ahead faster than we are. But I think it's interesting. Like the skateboarding's been fascinating with me, right? Because the kids, they understand the geometry of the ramps and stuff, right? At young ages, and I'm like, how do you know all that? But they I think
they really get into it at a detailed level. What kind of wheels you have and what kind of casters you have. I mean, it's not skateboarding like when we were children. Now it's an art.
This is the Forward Motion Business Show with Professor Ken and Professor Paul A Marino. Hit new heights. Start with forward motion.